You've probably heard of holding down Alt to curve your automations, but I bet you've never heard of holding Alt to adjust the resonance of your EQ bands. Huh? Can your EQ do this? You know what, I could have chosen a more impressive tip to start this video. Anyways, I've got 12 more Ableton tips up my sleeve, and I think you'll actually use them. Tip number 2. You can drag literally anything into your file browser and it will be saved instantly. So I'm going to drag this entire MIDI track into my user library folder on the right, and now I have it saved as a preset. So let's say if now I want to drag it back in a different project, I can do that. And everything in here is saved. Thank me later. Or actually, you can thank me now by smashing that like button. Tip number 3. Let's say you're arranging your track and you want to introduce a new instrument by slowly fading in its volume. And how I very often see people doing that is by automating the main volume fader. Now, the problem is when you do it like that, you're restricting your own ability to mix the track later on. And to avoid that, just add a utility plugin and automate the volume gain there instead. And speaking of adjusting the volume, when adjusting the values of a certain parameter, you can type in the specific value instead of fiddling with your mouse. And speaking of things that save you a lot of time, sort your projects. My system looks like this. I just have a separate folder for each year, and in there I have separate folders for the individual months of the year. That's it. This is the easiest and most effective sorting system that I know of. Let's say you have a drum loop and you want to make it more snap. Just turn on warp mode in the drum loop, choose beats from this menu, choose this arrow down here, and start reducing the transients envelope. This is before, and this is after. Kinda cool, isn't it? Tip number 7. If you look in the upper right corner of Ableton, you'll see this key button. If you click it, you'll be able to map literally any parameter to any key on your computer keyboard. You can put an EQ on the master channel, have it cut the lows, and map a key to activating the EQ. So now when I press A, for example, it will turn the low frequencies on or off. It's helpful when your ears get tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. Plus, low-key makes you feel like a DJ. And if you don't want to have to set this up every single time, you can save a default template with that EQ on the master, and all your key bindings will be saved. And speaking of default templates, you can do the same with plugins. If you find yourself setting up the same preset over and over again, just right-click on the plugin and select Save as Default Preset. And speaking of plugins, when you see a little triangle like this on a plugin, investigate it. You'll often discover some cool new uses of a plugin that just might inspire you. For example, clicking this triangle on the saturator plugin opens up a wave shaping menu where you can do crazy stuff like this. Huh? Cool. And speaking of triangles, my transitions are just so smooth, aren't they? If you go into a MIDI or an audio clip, you'll always see a small triangle like this up here. This little guy is called the start marker, and it determines where your pattern starts from. And if you drag it around, it's gonna sort of shift the loop. And this is an amazing way to find different grooves that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. Let me demonstrate it. So I have this cool synth right here. But now let's try shifting the start marker around. See, that's much more interesting. I literally did that in 2 seconds. Experiment with that. Now, for tip number 12, I want you to keep this in mind the next time you're going to be writing a melody. Basically, when writing your MIDI, it's usually best to start with the most basic sound possible. So that way, you ignore the tone and focus more on the melody itself while writing it. And only once the melody is ready do you start worrying about the actual sound of it. 90% of the time, you will end up designing a sound that fits that specific melody the best. And the melody itself will be much better too. So don't flick through the presets before you flick through the note. And last but not least, tip number 30. You've probably heard of using return tracks, right? But have you ever thought of using them to add texture? Let me show you. Let's create a new return track and let's add a vocoder to it, for example. Now, if I turn this knob up, it will add a noisy texture to my sound because of the vocoder. You can adjust it a little bit. Kinda cool, isn't it? You can also use an amp, for example, to have a quick way to beef sounds up. And I know you expected 13 tips, but fuck you. Since we're already talking about return tracks, I'm going to give you another tip about them.
It's bonus tip time!
There's a way to create amazing atmospheres from literally any sound using return tracks. There is a catch though. You have to watch this video to find out how to do it. So click here right now and I'll see you there. Cheers.